Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazine, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. With us today is designer Brenda French and poet-author Aram Saroyan. Entrepreneur Brenda French is the founder and owner of French Rags, a design company with a specialty in mass custom knitwear. A native of England, her career started in 1962 in New York. How did you get to New York, Brenda?
On a boat. I just had to get to New York. I grew up in England during the war, and it was not the greatest place to grow up in, as you can imagine. And I always had this thing about America. I always wanted to come here. And at 22, you either moved to London, or you went to Europe, or in my case, I came to New York. And I did literally come on a boat.
And what did you come to do?
Well, just to have, to be in life, you know.
Just to be here?
Yeah, to be in life. I wanted to be in the fashion business. And in 1962 in England, there was no fashion business. This was pre-Carnaby Street, pre-Mary Quant, pre-the Beatles. This was pre-everything, just before it all happened. And I just was, you know, I thought there was much more fun and excitement going on in New York, which of course proved to be absolutely true.
Well, how'd you get a job?
I went to an employment agency.
Oh, but did you have any design experience?
No.
So you weren't really, you just wanted to be in design.
Well, let me just back up here. First of all, I grew up with a mother who, if she had ever worked, would have been a fabulous designer.
I see.
She did everything. She sewed, she knitted, she made hats, she made what you know. And I was the little girl.
And did she do everything for you?
Yes, and she made all my clothes, and she taught me how to knit and sew and make jewelry, and she played fairies with me, you know, all the things that a little girl does. So I grew up knowing how to do all that. Wanted to be a designer, but in England at that time, if you wanted to go into fashion, you had to go to art school. And my father was a university professor, and he thought that going to art school was only what deadbeats did. So he wouldn't allow me to go to art school.
That's what I was going to ask you, if you had a design background or if you went to art school so that you could put your colors together.
No, the nearest I could come to it was to go to university and take a degree in home economics. That was the closest I could get that he would allow.
And they don't even do that anymore, do they?
No.
Do they have any home ec
Yes,
classes?
yes. In England. Oh, yes, in England. They always have. Yeah, they still teach home ec in grammar schools in England.
Well, we don't have
I know you don't. I know.
So, but that really did lead you and could be a stepping stone for you to be the gracious, living person like Martha Stewart.
Well, sort of. But what happened when I came to New York was I went to an employment agency, which is what everybody told me to do. And I said I wanted to be in the fashion business, and they sent me for an interview with a fashion office, and you probably know it, the Toby office. And they were looking for a proofreader. And they hired me just because I was English, and they figured that since I was English, I probably could spell.
But does a Toby report?
Yes.
Don't they do a report?
Yes.
So you had a lot to edit.
So actually, God smiled, because God said, this girl needs some training. And I went to the Toby office as the proofreader, and of course was a lousy proofreader because the report was so fascinating. I was reading it and not proofing it, but they all liked me. And I showed a little talent in writing, and by the end of my first year, they actually offered me a job to move over to the office side, and I started covering the sportswear market.
Oh, that's how you actually made your break into
So I broke out of proofreading into covering the sportswear market at a time when there was no sportswear market. Actually, there was car coats, blouses, pants, sweaters. There was no sportswear per se. Junior sportswear was the first one that came, and then, you know, regular sportswear. So I moved over covering the sportswear market and stayed there for 8 years. And that was really my university MBA and PhD in fashion. So that was my background.
Did you have to know, when you started designing on your own, did you have to know how to cut? Did you learn how to cut or design a pattern?
No. Well, I didn't know how to do that. I knew how to cut, I knew how to design, I could sew. All of that I got from my mother. And I had made my clothes my whole life. You couldn't grow up in England during the war and not make your own clothes, otherwise you didn't have any.
I went to the museum in England, and they showed the fashions from that period, and they made coats out of blankets.
Right.
Anything that they could get their hands on.
And out of your father's trousers.
Yeah.
Anything. You unwound sweaters and reknitted them. I mean, we were very ingenious.
You used everything.
Absolutely. Which, looking back on it, was a great training.
And it was a good look.
Yeah. I mean, Scarlett O'Hara wasn't the only one. that used the curtains.
It was a good look.
It was a good look, yeah. So that was all there in the background. Then I did this whole sort of merchandising, marketing, writing, covering the fashion market for a long time, and loved that, and went to Paris and covered the collections.
Did.
But I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was really meant to be a designer, because that's really what I wanted to do. And so one day I just said, I'm going to be a designer, and I started asking the people I knew in the business if they would hire me, and somebody did.
Well, could you draw?
Not really.
Did you do mix and match?
But I knew if it looked good. You know, I could sort of draw. I've become not bad at it, actually, but I could sort of draw what I wanted. But I knew what I wanted. And I had a very good eye for fabric, and I knew everything about cutting, sewing, tailoring, you know, how to make it look right.
Well, when you went to this person who backed you, I mean, bless him, right?
Bless
at the
him,
beginning,
yeah,
or
yeah,
bless
yeah.
her. Who, But did you have to show a line of things, or
no.
fabrics?
They just went off on a limb and trusted me and figured I could do it. And it was for a blouse company, actually. I was designing blouses.
In America, you didn't go back to
525 7th Avenue, Weber Blouses.
Right
Irving
away.
Weber, God bless his heart,
Really?
hired me to be a blouse designer, and I loved it. But then shortly after that, I moved to the West Coast. I was married at the time, and my husband was interested in the film business, so we moved to Los Angeles. And then when I came to Los Angeles, I started freelancing. And I was picked up, first of all, by a company called Huckapoo, which you may remember from years ago, and they were in knitwear.
Huckapoo, I don't remember, but the next place you worked for, I remember.
Which was which one?
Which was, I can't remember. You have to tell me.
Patty Woodard.
Patty Woodard.
Right.
Was that the next place?
That was the next place. So Huckapoo was in the knitwear business, and they sent me to Hong Kong, and their idea of designing knitwear was go buy sweaters, send me to Hong Kong, and knock them off. And I had a knitting machine, and I said, well, why don't you let me knit swatches? What do you mean knit swatches? I had no idea, you know, what do you mean knit? You can knit? Oh my goodness. And then when I went to Hong Kong, because I was English, they let me in the factories. They actually let me in, and they realized that I knew how to knit. And that was where the knitting thing happened.
When you were talking about knitting, just knitting? With
well, no, I had a
hand
knitting machine. No, well, I can do that too, Joan. I can do that too. No, I had a tabletop machine, a home machine, and I knew how to knit, so I could knit swatches. And going with actual fabric rather than copying what somebody else had done in the late 60s was very novel. I mean, nobody really had done that.
So they used your colors then and your kind of knit, and then they used their looms and their machines for Huckapoo.
Right, exactly, over in Hong Kong.
Was that a medium class?
They were junior. They were junior volume, but hot, all new, you know, very hot stuff. And then I got hired by Patty Woodard to do their whole knitwear line. And then I went, again, I was going backwards and forwards to Hong Kong, and going into the factories, that was how I got to understand what the knitting business was all about.
Was Patty Woodward here?
Yes.
Oh, so
yes,
you
in Gardena.
Just stayed here?
Yes, I stayed here.
Gardena.
Right, I stayed here. I stayed here.
So you really hit it at the top of mass-produced things.
Exactly, exactly. It was the late 70s, the middle of the 70s, which was kind of a hot time for the fashion business. There was a lot happening, and it was still very much the way it had been, and there were volume sportswear companies. There were Jax was still very big here.
People wanted to look a certain way.
That California look, you know, and the casualness of knits was just beginning. I was just really when the whole T-shirt thing happened. That was the mid-70s, when we really began wearing a lot more T-shirts and colored T-shirts and fitted T-shirts and tank tops and that whole thing, yeah.
So then, from Patty?
Well, then I got divorced.
And your life began.
And my life began, right. And at that point, Patty Woodward was going out of business, and I had a 9-year-old. And it seemed to me that I didn't want to be spending my life going backwards and forwards to Hong Kong when I had a 9-year-old. And it seemed that I really ought to, at that point, you know, decide to open my own business, because really, when you have children, that's the only way you have any power over your life as a single woman, is to have your own business. Because then, you know, if the kid's sick, you can allow yourself to stay home.
But you were way ahead of that. You were way ahead, thinking that the only way you're going to have a life is start your own business.
Yeah, that was 1978.
Now people think that they start their own business, they can stay in the home, they can come and go with a child schedule.
Right. It just seemed the only logical thing to do to me was start my own business. And having been to Hong Kong and having seen these knitting factories and knowing that there was a very strong Korean population here in LA, I figured maybe I can do what's happening in Hong Kong here. So I started out in my 3rd bedroom. By myself.
So now we're to French rags.
Right, now we're to French rags. I started out in my 3rd bedroom, and I'm knitting away, and I'm scared stiff of doing this, Joan. I'm really scared at what I've said I'll do, because this seems like, oh my Lord. And I'm knitting away, and I'm knitting these pieces of fabric, and I'm not quite sure what I'm doing with them, but they look like scarves. And I'm thinking, now scarves, that's a good idea. No sizes. If one's longer than the other, it doesn't matter. It seemed like a nice, simple business. So I'm with a bunch of women going out for lunch, and I'm tying all these scarves around my neck. And we go out for lunch, and one of my friends said to me, "Oh, my goodness, Brenda, what are those rags around your neck?"
Oh, you're kidding.
And I said, "Those are not rags, they're French rags." And the minute I said it, I said, "That's it."
The best name.
It just came. It just came. Somebody said it. And I went, "Oh, French rags, that's it." And I thought, what a great name for a scarf company.
Perfect.
And so the very first year I was in business, all I did was make scarves.
Do you still have those?
We still make scarves. I actually didn't bring any.
You didn't bring any scarves. But
we
tell
still
us
make
what
scarves.
you did bring, because from scarves you went into...
From scarves we went to one sweater a year later, one size only, God forbid. And that led to a long sleeve sweater, a short sleeve sweater. That led to a skirt. That led to an entire coordinated sportswear collection. And that led to what we're doing today, which is much more complicated. Mass customized knitwear. Now you have to understand that 10 years ago I got out of selling to the stores and began to sell my own collection myself to clients like yourself.
So people come together with a representative?
Yeah, I have consultants all over the country. We have consultants who work out of their own homes, either in ones, twos, or threes, depending on how they like to work. They get the collection for 1 week, and they work by appointment only. This is a very important part of what I do, because we feel, or I feel, that women, when they're buying clothes, they just want to get it over and done with. And they want an intelligent person to sit with one-on-one and get it done. So that's what we do.
I see.
So there's no parties, there's no groups, it's you and me or you and one of my consultants.
I see.
And they will talk to you about your lifestyle, they'll explain to you what we do, and then you can look at all our different separates and all our different things.
And here, I can't believe this.
And you can buy them in 60 different colors. This is our color wheel.
I can't believe this, because if I had to sit and decide what to do from this color wheel, I would never know where to start or stop.
Well, you know, I would say to you, Joan, what's your favorite color? And you would tell me. And we'd start there.
So we'd start like around in here.
There you go.
In this
you
group.
have a favorite color. See, I know you. I knew you would.
And then you can have my favorite color in anything here?
In anything here.
The Chinese influence, the shell.
Yes, the little butterflies
with a bag.
The little bag was made out of leftover fabric, and we just did it for a lark, and now we're stuck. Everybody wants bags to go with their jackets. It's like every time you do something, it catches on. And you'll see that what you can do with these clothes is kind of buy related colors and put together 4 or 5 pieces and make a weekend wardrobe. And it's all about wardrobing, really,
the one thing, before we leave, I know these are the greatest things to travel with.
Right.
Did you think of this? Was this
No.
Oh, you did.
No, I'm sorry. I got into rayon. Everything that we make is 100% rayon. The reason I got into rayon, 2 reasons. Number 1, it takes color better than any other yarn. And I am a color freak. I love beautiful colors. I love true colors. That's number 1. Number 2, when I began to make it knitted into clothes, I discovered it makes you look thin. That was the other, that was the other big reason.
Good point.
Makes you look thin.
Good
Very
point.
important. And then what came out of it later was that it travels really well too. And so you had, you know, gorgeous colors, very flattering, great to wear, makes you look thin, travels well. What more do we want?
I don't know.
You know,
I
we
think
got
you
it all.
covered it all. You covered it all.
We got it all.
Because many times I'm a great traveler, and I'm always thinking I need something that you can just pull out without any wrinkles.
And these do.
And
they
these
just come right out of a suitcase, on they go, no wrinkles.
So I'll be wearing this on the set next time.
There we go. There we go.
You'll see that I won't be wrinkled, and the next time I'll be in a Brenda French rag.
In your favorite color.
In my best color. Don't go away, because we'll be back with Aram Saroyan, and we want to thank you, Brenda, for being with us.
It was a pleasure, Joan, as always.
We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and we're back with Aram Saroyan. Aram is a writer of the novel, biography, the play, teleplay, and screenplay. His reviews and articles have appeared in a wide range of periodicals. He's been on the faculty at USC, UC Santa Barbara, and UCLA. Aram served as the president of Penn West in 1992. Aram,
yes.
You went to Trinity School in Manhattan, But does that mean you were born in California or born in New York?
I was born in New York and grew up bi-coastally, San Francisco, New York, L.A., New York, and then with my parents' second divorce, my mother moved with my sister and me to Manhattan. And so from the time I was about 11 till I was 22, I lived in New York.
Oh, so that's where you went to Trinity?
Yeah.
Oh, because you're so chic to go to Trinity School. Most Californians don't go there.
I know. This is a big commute.
Well, let's do it as a big commute. That union with the two divorces was William Saroyan,
yes.
your father, and
Yeah.
Carol Marcus Mathau now.
Yes, yeah. My mother married Walter when I was 15.
I see. So you were raised, actually, half of your life both with two fathers.
Well, Walter was a nice stepdad in that he never sort of encroached on Pop's being the primary parent, but was always there as a, especially during adolescence, which was nice.
In 1962 to 1964, you attended the University of Chicago, NYU, and Columbia. What were you doing? Why were there so many schools involved in this short period of time?
Well, you got to remember it was the 60s, and you know, there was a sense in the 60s that you could get information from school, but not necessarily learn how to think. I don't know whether that still pertains or not, but I enjoyed going to all those schools.
You did. You actually decided. You weren't because of bad grades or because of any other thing.
They played a role.
And not because of your restlessness. You actually decided that you wanted to go to these places?
Yeah, I decided I wanted to go to those places, and then I learned stuff at those places. Great stuff. I mean, we read Plato, we read Freud, we read Melville. You know, it was a lot. It was very interesting. I was already interested in writing, and at the University of Chicago, which was the first place I went to, I got a poem accepted by The Nation, and I thought, wow.
Do you think that was because you were at the University of Chicago? I mean, did they have a tie somehow?
No, not at all. I sent it to a poet that I admired, who was the poetry editor there, David Ignatow, and he accepted the poem, and that was very encouraging. And then Poetry Magazine in Chicago printed 6 poems in a review about a year later. By that time, I had dropped out. I was working in a bookstore in Manhattan, and Allen Ginsberg was coming in, and it was a very, very exciting time for American poetry. It was right after Howl and the Beats and the Angry Young Men in England, and so people thought about being writers in those days the way people think about being in a rock group today.
I see. But in poetry, because we don't have that really genre so well,
That's
it may
true.
be coming back now,
Yeah.
but it has been almost a dead issue.
It's very much in eclipse right now. You have a scene right now in the 90s that reminds me of the 50s, with the new critics holding everything down tight before the Beats erupted and sort of took that poetry back for people and took it into the street and so on. Now it's very dull. You know, people have a kind of a lockdown thing going on, and it's too bad because poetry's always been fun.
Poetry is, for me, was always very difficult. I could never really understand it. Of course, I went to a girls' school, so I had to read a lot of poetry, a lot of prose, and break things down and know what was going on. It was still difficult. But I heard you read the other night at a local bookstore, and your poems just seemed to flow. They were very easy to understand.
Thank you.
So in 1968, after these colleges that you went to and working in New York, you got a National Endowment of the Arts, talking about poetry, from Duncan.
Well, Robert Duncan, they had a program at that point where they gave awards to the best poems and the best stories to appear in smaller magazines.
I see.
And my poem, my one-word poem, Light, with an extra GH in it, L-I-G-H-G-H-T, appeared in the Chicago Review. And Robert Duncan, who's a marvelous poet, really one of the great American poets.
Blue guitar? No.
No, you're
Who's
thinking
that?
of Wallace Stevens.
Wallace Stevens.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why I was confused when you said Robert Duncan. Yeah.
Robert Duncan, San Francisco Poetry Renaissance, really the great, one of the godfathers of the poetry renaissance of the 50s that involved Rex Roth and Allen Ginsberg and Kerouac and so on, chose the poem. And after that, all hell broke loose because a congressman brought it up on the floor of Congress. Now, remember, I didn't apply for a grant. They gave me $500, and the Chicago Review got $250 for printing it. So this guy brings it up and says, this is a misuse of public money at the rate of $8.25 per letter. And they cut the budget by something like $9 million, the NEA budget at that time.
But wasn't that funny when we had the same thing happening with the NEA a few years ago? Did you start thinking about what they had done to you?
They brought it up again. They bring the poem up 30 years later.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they show the poem on CNN. The poem no longer has an author. I'm no longer mentioned. They just flash L-I-G-H-G-H-T and say...
One word, though. Is that it? It was a minimal poem.
It was a minimal poem. And, you know, that was what light was like during the 60s.
I couldn't say, I knew what the title was, but I didn't know how you said it. So I was waiting for you to say what the title was.
It's just a little bit of a heavier light. So it's odd because you think about how much they've spent now with the Kenneth Starr investigation. You know.
But the point was, you were recognized, and you were recognized for something that came out of that period that you were living in,
right?
Something that was contemporary at the time, which obviously has carried over all these years.
Well, that's funny because now I find the poem is on the internet, but oddly enough, it's misspelled. They've spelled it L-I-G-H-T-G-H-T, and there's no. It's L-I-G-H without a T, G-H-T.
Oh, you know why? When I read your bio, I looked at it and I saw L-I-G-H-T, G-H-T. I saw it wrong.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it wrong in my own mind, obviously.
Maybe it's better that way.
Well, your father was alive at that time when you were getting this recognition, the great writer, William Saroyan. Did he want to jump in and fight the NEA?
No, I think his impulse was with them. He was ambivalent about those that period of my work, and on the one hand, he was delighted in a certain way, just interested in what this minimal poetry might be all about. But on the other, as a working writer, I think he was a little upset that his son was doing this.
You've written books. You wrote a book about your mother and her friends, who are very interesting women.
Trio, yeah.
A trio. What? Tell us, Una Chaplin and...
Una, Gloria, and Carol. And that was an interesting book, because that was sold by Andrew Wiley about 10 years ago without a word on paper. I had done a screenplay about the three of them, fictionalized. I said, I've got an idea you can sell at lunch. And he said, yeah, but you got to write something down. So I said, well, just try it. I'll write something down too.
3 names?
Carol, Una, and Gloria, and he called back the next day. He said, I sold it. And I said, oh no, now I have to write it.
Oh.
And it was a tough. Actually, I learned how to write a novel writing that book because I had to make up a lot of stuff around narratives that were true.
But they didn't do interviews.
Oh yeah, I did interviews with Gloria and Una and certainly with my mother. But it's not like a kind of none of these ladies are Eleanor Roosevelt, so there's not an incredible file.
I'm going to go to Bolinas.
Okay.
Before you hang yourself.
Oh my God, you're right. Thank God you stopped me.
I want to save you.
Yeah.
This is a book of poetry, day and night.
Bolinas poems. Bolinas, yeah.
What is Bolinas? It's published, first of all, by Black Sparrow Press.
Right.
And now tell us what Bolinas is. I know what it is, but you tell our viewers.
Bolinas is a little northern California town, the western edge of Marin County. It's almost an island. It's a peninsula. About 2,000 people lived there, and I moved there with my wife and our baby daughter. Back in 1972, I was 29, and the town officialdom was around my age, and they were people that I got to know very quickly. So it was a very unique place to be. If you can imagine being under 30 and having the town governing body
by your
own
peers,
peers,
your peers,
right on the heels of the 60s, and it was terribly. To me, it was a whole psychological threshold, because instead of battling the status quo the way you normally do when you're a young writer, there was all this support and all this sense of. And so it led to a whole breakthrough for me as a writer. I had been doing minimal poetry and being an artist, and suddenly I was a writer, writing with my own voice about stuff that I really cared about.
And people really listening to you. We have we're right at the end of our segment here, but read us something.
Okay. How much can I? How long? How much can I read?
Well, we have about a minute and a half left.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll read a quick sonnet here. This is very much a book about having a family. As I watch my daughter's faces climb through time and my little son grow into talk, I realize this is the gift, the great reward that I sought, the rock I found at the center of my dream with everybody's initials carved on it. Something hard to understand in language, yet actual as the blades of grass, the roses climbing the fence, or the cricket's repeated opinion of the earth. As I see my children look closely into my eyes and notice them noticing me noticing them, while the clock is ticking and everything is just as important as it was 2 hours ago, and yet I forget then. I forget everything for a second in the pale moment of no one at all that makes life great.
I love that. Looking, each person looking and looking and looking.
Thank you.
You just get this long, you get these wonderful visual pictures from what you've written. And I wish I could have you read more, but let's have
Day and night.
Our readers go and buy.
And available in your local bookstore.
Yeah, I can't wait to read all of it. I've read some of it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aram, for being with us.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank all of you for being with us on the Joan Quinn Profiles today. Keep writing, because we'll answer your letters. Write them to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, 917. See you next time.